Hello, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to allow another minute for folks to continue to trickle in, and then we'll get started. Okay. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Kay from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're thrilled to host tonight's event with Vince Passaro launching his new book, Crazy Sorrow. He will be talking with Kathryn Harrison, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Vince, Kathryn, and the team at Simon & Schuster for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Although we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, just a couple of housekeeping things. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here though, and there are a couple of different ways you can interact with the authors and with each other throughout tonight's event, which we highly encourage. The first is the chat, which you can find by clicking on the icon that looks like one speech balloon. You're welcome to post your comments and thoughts in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the author and interact with fellow attendees. If you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the author, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program. And importantly, tonight's featured book, Crazy Sorrow, is available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. You can shop in person from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. at both our Fulton Street and Flatbush Ave stores, where you can purchase Vince's book and many others online. You can also order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. I'll drop the buy link in the chat. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured book is a great way to show your support. And now our interviewer tonight is Kathryn Harrison. Kathryn has written the novels Thicker Than Water, Exposure, Poison, The Binding Chair, The Seal Wife, Envy, and Enchantments. Her autobiographical work includes The Kiss, Seeking Rapture, The Road to Santiago, The Mother Knot, and True Crimes. She has written two biographies, Saint Therese of Lisieux and Joan of Arc, and a book of true crime, While They Slept. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband, the novelist Kathryn Harrison. They will be speaking with our featured author, Vince Passaro. Vince's criticism and essays have appeared in many prominent publications, including Harper's Magazine, where he is a contributing editor, The Nation, the New York Times Sunday Magazine, the New York Times Book Review, Elle, Salon, and others, along with short fiction in such national magazines and literary journals as Esquire, GQ, Open City, Agni, Story, Boulevard, and Quarterly West. His first novel, Violence, Nudity, Adult Content, was published in 2002. He lives a few miles north of New York City in an old Huguenot town with his wife, son, and a smattering of film cameras, fountain pens, and other fellow traveling refuse from the mid-20th century. Vince's new book, Crazy Sorrow, is a lyrical novel spanning 4 decades in New York City about a couple torn apart and the lengths to which they will go to be reunited. The New York Times described it as intelligent, serious, unapologetically explicit, and gorgeously written. Vince is going to start us off with a reading from the book, and then he'll be talking with Kathryn and with all of you. Please take it away, Vince.
Thank you so much, Kay. I just want to set this up a little bit. There are 2 characters in this novel, 2 main characters. Their names are George and Anna. They meet in 1976 at celebration of the Bicentennial. And and they become lovers, and then they break up. It's a college affair, and the novel tracks their lives over the next several decades. So in the summer of 1980, we're with Anna, and she's out on a date with a man she's having an affair with, who, after a party, they're walking uptown, up 6th Avenue from the village. They live on the Upper West Side in Morningside Heights. And she's quite aware that he's planning to break up with her. And he has them sit down, and he starts breaking up with her. And she doesn't take it lightly or easily, and torments him a bit. And then they decide to take a cab uptown and end their evening. The key thing you need to know about the scene in which they're trying to break up is he starts breaking up with her, and it's the summer of 1980, and she suddenly says to him, "You're going to vote for Reagan, aren't you?" And he says, "No, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. I haven't decided yet." And he says, "You're going to vote for Reagan." And she says, "You know what? This is fine. I'm glad, because you're going to vote for Reagan." So they get the cab, and that's the scene that we're going to join now. Their driver, who had the look Anna thought of Frank Zappa meets the doorman on Rhoda, even though you never saw the doorman on Rhoda, you knew this was what he looked like, started chatting as soon as they'd given their twin destinations, first his place, then hers, 2 blocks farther uptown. He was a talker. Then he held a fat joint in the open window of the bulletproof divider. "Do you guys get high?" he said. "Yeah, sure," Anna said. "I mean, I will. I don't know about him. He's voting for Reagan." "No shit," the driver said. He turned around. He didn't use the mirror, but did the full turn to look at Evan before turning back to the road. "You're voting for that dickwad?" "I don't know who I'm voting for," Evan said. "Maybe I'll vote for Anderson." "Casper the Friendly Fucking Ghost, you mean?" the driver said. "Well, whatever turns you on, man." He lit the joint, inhaled, and passed it over the seat for them to take from him, which Anna did. She pulled in a short toke to get the feel of it, then a larger one, and held it down. She handed it to Evan. When the driver blew his smoke out, it curled from his open window and blew directly into Anna's. Evan handed the joint back over the seat, coughing slightly. "That fucker's going to win," cab driver said. They were in Central Park, alone, with no other cars, on the Park Drive, rattling through the crossing lights, both red and green. It occurred to Anna that if they got stopped, they'd all go to jail. That would put a crimp in Evan's career plans. "People are just stupid enough to elect that guy," the cabbie said. "They all think he can make them rich. I mean, all the white people." While he was talking, he waved the joint around like a baton. Anna leaned across Evan, who was looking glum and silent, and poked her head into the driver's little window. She smiled at him and gently took the joint from his fingers. "Good dope," she said. "Yeah," he said, "I got it from this American Indian dude. I can't remember what tribe he is, Apache or some shit. Anyway, cool guy, sells some prime weed. He's got these sensimilla sticks. They look like little veggie kebabs, man. You just want to eat them." "Cool," said Anna. She pulled on the joint and wondered why she'd said cool in that way, as if she were 17 and living in Santa Cruz. Some sudden reversion to high school stoner speak. One more social pose for the repertoire. She pulled herself over onto Evan's leg so she could continue leaning into the opening. She put herself on Evan's lap, essentially, and it felt good, which annoyed her. His hand was on her hip, keeping her balanced. Slowly, it moved to the top of her thigh. She opened her legs slightly because of the pot, because of the weight and the warmth of his hand there made her want to, because she was curious to see what he'd do, and because now that she didn't care about him, unlike an hour ago, it was quite possible to fuck him. She pulled herself out of the driver's window with the joint. Evan's hand moved inward. She took a second hit, turned herself sideways, leaned into Evan's face, and started blowing the smoke slowly into his mouth. Grudgingly, his lips opened. She was staring at his cheek, clean shaven, as it always was and always would be, world without end, amen. Imagine that, for the entire rest of his utterly predictable life. She wanted to do something to him. She didn't know what. She blew the last smoke into his eyes. "Ah," he said, "stings." "Serves you right," she said. The problem with getting high is all the thinking. Why had she let herself be smitten by this child? He was certainly handsome. He was ambitious. He was decent in bed, athletic and durable. if not terrifically sensitive. Then he had cried. That about wrapped it up. He was intellectually not her equal, and tonight in particular she could see, even better now that she was stoned, the bedrock cowardice that would dominate his life. So they wouldn't have lasted even if it had lasted. And all her fantasies once again were dried and flat, ready to be folded and put away with the pile of other bad romances and embarrassing hopes that she was collecting for her trousseau. Plus, his hand had stopped well short of the goal line. What a putz. She looked him in the eye. You're scared of me now, she said. No, he said. He gave her an unconvincing smile. Sure, she said. She pulled up her skirt and pushed his hand down right onto her wet spot. There you go. He seemed to be able to figure it out from there. By the time the cab veered out of the park at 110th Street, there was no doubt she would go upstairs with him. After the joint was done, she had turned herself again on his lap to face front, leaned back against his chest, and pulling his head toward hers, managed to get her lips onto the corners of his. He had begun to kiss her, and she had taken his hand and put it again between her legs. They made out in this way, her squirming in his lap, feeling him hard beneath her, keeping her hand over his as she pushed it up her leg and massaged her. He kissed her neck. Zappa, the driver, was glancing at them in the rear view as he drove, and really, who wouldn't? Once or twice she stared right back. Her brazenness amazed her. It was new. When they pulled up to Evans' place on 106th Street, halfway down the block to the river, she hopped from his lap and straightened her clothes. Cancel the second stop, she said, through the acrylic opening. Evan had taken out his wallet. I'll pay, she said. He looked at her and put the wallet away. She tugged a 20 from her tiny bag and got out of the car on the wrong side and went to the driver's window. Thank you so much for a wonderful ride, she said, and she blew him a little kiss. Hey, he said, no problem. The ride was $4.75, and she tipped him $5 plus the quarter. She had never tipped a cabbie anything close to $5 before. She was stoned, seductive, angry, and rash. Evan stood on the sidewalk watching. She felt like an assassin. In the elevator, she pushed into him, put her hand on his pants, kissed him. This is new, he said. She detected his nervousness and so continued, amused, even going a little harder. His face looked like something made from dough. He was afraid. Up in his bedroom, she executed it all ruthlessly. She pleased him ruthlessly, straddling him, running her body down along him, letting her breasts fall against him, her hair moving downward, taking him in her mouth briefly, feeling his breath suck in, feeling him rise. Funny the way men almost levitated when you did that. Ruthlessly, she provided this tandem of brief pleasures while he lay there, and then ruthlessly, she fucked him. That phrase, ain't no pleasure but meanness, flicking through her mind. She seemed so small, he seemed so small, so insignificant to her, even while he lay beneath her and was inside her. She pushed down roughly on him, and she thought, so this is what it's about. This is what it feels. This is what it is to feel powerful. This is what it is to feel like a man. What one needed to experience power was to find an advantage and to use it, to abandon the idea of equality or justice or love. In the flush of that thought, she began moving much faster on top of him as if she were a guy, and her orgasm rose up strong and fast from a deep heat in the middle of her, up her thighs and down from her abdomen. And usually this happened slowly, and often it hung there, not arriving, or sometimes arriving, but not here, not now. She came, she fell upon him for a moment, and then she rolled off of him. He followed her as if he would now get on top, but she shook her head, pushed him back, and rose from the bed. What? He said clearly. What he said. Clearly he was shocked. So was she, though in a more pleasant way. She quickly had her underpants on and then was hooking her bra. She could feel that her chest and cheeks were still flushed. She was breathing hard. Woo, she said. What a strange, unreliable gift orgasm is. He glared at her, an angry, disbelieving expression. She would remember it later with a trace of sympathy, but for now it only annoyed her that he still, after his performance, had expectations. She lifted her pink dress above her head and let it fall over her body like a curtain coming down at the end of a play. And you're just leaving, he said. He sounded like a bratty 12-year-old boy, and the particular note in his voice was so familiar As she knew, though she had not acknowledged it before, that he frequently sounded like a bratty 12-year-old boy. Her little sweater, her shoes, her bag, all there. She was straightening her hair in the elevator. I'm not just leaving, she said. I guess I'll call you, he said. Don't, she said, and then she walked out. In the outer hall, she stood, slightly nauseated, waiting for the elevator in the dim landlord light. Ah, here was the flip side of power, isolation. She felt as if she were in a capsule of some kind, autonomous and untouchable. Power was a disease. It cut you off like leprosy. What a vista of solitude. Until now, even to be aware of such a state had been completely outside her nature, not to mention her convictions, which were flimsier things. She was utterly still, almost frozen, feeling herself change. All the narrative trajectories she'd sketched for her life, sexually, romantically, professionally, even spiritually, pointed to some relatively nice ending that as of this minute she didn't believe in anymore. Maybe she would again tomorrow, maybe not. Maybe from here on everything would be different, and she would remember this night, this sex, this emptying moment in the hall as the point when everything was altered, when her life went off in a new and not necessarily better direction. Now, here it was, right in front of her, making her dizzy, this change. She felt it, a part of her, but also not, something alien. This was the unmooring of American life. Now anything was possible. Any form of false promise, any form of blindness, any form of savagery, destruction, cruelty, or ruin. And why not? After all, it was the beginning of a new decade. And so it was.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the unmooring of American life. This book is about a couple of particular people, but it's also so much about what's happened in this country in the last 30 years. And it's especially from the viewpoint of a New Yorker, the New Yorker who was at the Bicentennial celebration in 1976. And it was also here in 2001 when the trade towers came down. And there's just a huge, it's and of course I'm the perfect age to read this book because, I can, yeah. And yeah, I love what you read because of the whole idea of power being a disease and her feeling of power in sex and her feeling of what it was like to be a man. And there's so much going on. But I guess I want to ask you what it's like to write a novel that has this scope, because there's clearly been a huge, unless you worked for Starbucks and were down at the site after the towers came down, you've just done a lot of research, and maybe we could talk about that a little bit, because I don't know if you like.
Research is interesting because I do very little research. I'm so lazy, it's unbelievable. I lose interest in no time flat.
That's so funny, because I was reading it, I read parts of it and I thought, oh wow, Vince just really went down the rabbit hole following this. So this is all like just lived experience.
It's that I went down certain rabbit holes over 40 years, and then I saved the rabbit holes and had them more or less accessible as I was working. My friend, a very dear man, a superb photographer named Edward Keating for the New York Times, was down there every day and told me all about it. He was down for more than a month. He's just died of cancer.
And the basis for a character in the novel.
There's a couple of bases for that character, but the 9/11 photography is definitely based on Ed. And Ed just passed away 2 weeks ago, I think, and of cancer that he believed he had because he'd spent a month and a half down there, day in and day out. He was sneaking in as a worker and then taking pictures from inside his coat with his Leica. And he won a Pulitzer. The Times won a Pulitzer, but I think his pictures had a lot to do with it. I think they have acknowledged that his pictures had a lot to do with it. So, for instance, a lot of details. I was down because my kids were at St. John the Divine. St. Paul's was another Episcopal church, and St. Paul's was doing all of the caretaking for the workers down there. And volunteers were gathered from this, Episcopal cult. And so I was able to spend a couple of nights down there, and I had that. On and on. It's just like, it just all piles up in there, but it's deeply unreliable. So in fact, during the copy editing of the book, I had the towers wrong, I had the times wrong, I had this wrong, I had that wrong. I mean, I didn't have that much wrong. I shouldn't imply I had, but there were 3 or 4 crucial things that were wrong. I just had to quick, Google, Wikipedia, fix it up. The scope was why I didn't know what the hell I was writing. I had no idea what I was writing. What I just read from was the earliest thing that I wrote that is in the book still. I wrote other stuff that's not in the book. And I wrote it as a short story and appeared in Agni in 2007 or 8, maybe. And then later, when I had George meeting a woman, I suddenly realized that was the woman he was meeting. And that was several years later. So in that story, which became that chapter, in the beginning portions of the novel, which are set at Columbia in the 70s, in various points along the way, my driving desire had been, I wanted to show what it was like in New York at that time, just what it was like, and there's so much that's missing from that, because what it was like was, larger than I can manage. But pardon me for my cough. But the scope became, sort of the stone on the back of the purgatorial figure in Dante. And I'm walking around bent double, with
which I think is the description of George grieving, isn't it?
Wow,
Later,
you got me.
later in the book.
I didn't think of that. Yeah, see, just a few things in the head, and then you just work them over and over and over.
Yep.
But yes, the scope of the book was, became ultimately a very glorious thing for me when I got it all down and I got it pushed roughly into order, and then I could work on it. And that was the best time, but it took years to get there, years and years and years.
Yeah. And of course, the towers exist as these, well, you invoke Kubrick in the beginning in a sort of a laughing way, but they exist as these inscrutable monuments on one end and not quite the end of the trajectory. And, they're, and what they mean in terms of capitalism and what it is to be American and what we celebrate about ourselves, which is something we can't actually even see. And, it just really, I lived here raising a family during the same period. And it was I loved reading this book because there's not very, I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of stuff out there that's about sort of, oh, well, on 9/11, I was X and I felt this. But there's not very many. Suddenly, the image of who was the Frenchman who walked between the towers. Yeah, yeah, amazing. But there's something about, I mean, that image is in the book, and it's a really great sort of image of the book in a way, because wind comes into it, and the sort of the trajectory of a human life and how fragile it is in terms of the great forces around it. But it's all right. So in the beginning of the book, and here's a sort of writer to writer question, because I do think that, and I mean this is praise. It's been
Well,
I
it's my
think it's
fan.
about me, but I feel like you're a writer's writer. I mean, you write beautiful sentences, and there's a great deal of pleasure in reading it. So I was wondering, and you invoke Hemingway very early on, and I feel like if there's an American sort of father of letters who flits through this book, it's actually Hemingway. I mean, I feel like he comes in sort of. You didn't know that?
Well, I wrote a piece for Harper's Magazine years ago about the American short story, in which I said that Hemingway was, of course, a huge influence on the American short story, and the problem was he wasn't very intelligent, and he was wrong about everything. There isn't a single thing that Hemingway believed about life that you would take from his fiction that turns out to be accurate or useful. But at the same time, I've read a huge amount of Hemingway when I was, 18, 19. So I'm not surprised if he's in there, although I'm resentful.
Oh, don't be.
No, I'm not resentful of you. I'm saying I'm resentful that he's lodged in there somewhere.
No, because, well, I don't have any problem. I mean, no, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there were sentences, and I actually don't. I'm not saying that Hemingway flirts through in terms of what he believed or what he stood for or anything, but there are every once in a while some sort of wonderfully Hemingway-esque sentences.
I'll take those. His sentences could be very, very great. There's no question.
Oh yeah, they have this sort of, and they occur, I mean, some of them have to do with George during sex, and some of them are in other places, but they have that sort of really sort of columnar male gravitas, and they just sort of like land with a verb and a noun, and so I don't know, I just sort of thought, oh hi, here you are. And in the beginning, when George and Anna meet, of course they have that little banter about
this wine is good.
Yes, this wine is good.
Yeah. And it's so funny. You hear these things in your head, and you can't type "this wine is good" without saying, that's a goddamn Hemingway line, and because it is, you know what I mean. You hear it.
Yeah.
And, the music is the same. I mean, like, there's all this music in the book, and it sort of has to get acknowledged because it's in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I meant it as a compliment.
Well, anyway, it was a compliment, so thank you. I'm just, I thought somehow that I had managed to wash the Hemingway away, but no.
Well, at some point, I can't. Well, there's. You bring there are many allusions in this book to Kubrick, to, oh gosh, all over the place, Joan Didion, and one of the pleasures of the book is that it's a gratifying book for somebody who pays attention to culture and who read things along the way, because there are things that chime along, and it's not exclusionary. It's not like if you don't get them, you're at sea in the book at all. It's just that there's a sense of somebody who has been consuming the culture, reporting on it in a kind of
Mhm.
expansive way, which is great. There's just not that many books like that.
Yeah, I don't advise writing them. It's
Well,
it
so
takes
do
an
you,
awful long time.
well,
Yeah,
no, but so
it's hard.
can you talk about what it's like to work for so long on a single work? Because you grow, you change, you go back, you cut things out. I mean, you've said that then we had a conversation before this one in which you alluded to another part of the book that had come from a separate work, and I use the sort of term organ donation, but what has gone into making this book?
Um, if every writer, of course, has a different and uh, every time you undertake a new work, it's different, and every writer is different. But for me, I mean, for one of the things that there are two main characters, and the story goes back and forth. So that gave me some flexibility. I could be working on him, or I could be working on her. And originally, there were four characters. Who there's a playwright and a photographer as well. They are now more minor characters, but they had their own close third person sections. And the first editor who read the book at Simon Schuster in 2018 said, "No way can you pull this off. It's too much. You've got to just stick to George and Anna, and that's your, because there isn't much plot here, but that's the plot.
Right.
They love each other, and they ultimately want to be together." So for a long time, I had, I could move around among four characters, and then ultimately I'm moving around among two characters, or between two characters. And you know what it's like. I mean, some days you think, I can't look at this. I can't deal with this. I don't want to think about this. I would rather watch, 8 episodes of Tatort, Berlin, or anything rather than work on this bloody thing. And then other times you're like, oh wait, here I have something, and I can get it moving again. And you just slog along, and I had chronology, it was, so I had dates and high points that I wanted, that were in my head, that I wanted to hit.
Dates in terms of New York and the history of us as a society, or?
Yeah. Like in this particular chapter, the election of Reagan was a kind of underlying motivation.
Well, if New York is a character and the United States is a character, and I do think, and I do think it is, and suddenly just popped into my head the whole notion of character is fate. I think that's especially true of, actually, if we apply it to America, the United States, as opposed to the characters, the smaller human figures, but that there's the sense of late stage capitalism and consumerism, and it's,
I mean, George has this, George gets very wealthy, being the second in command for a coffee shop chain that gets started in the Lower East Side and becomes like Starbucks. And at a certain point, he reflects that there's a difference between serving a real need and providing something that people really need, or else going out and stirring them to want something and then giving it and then selling it to them.
Yes, great use of the word stirring, by the way, given it's a coffee company.
Right, exactly.
But Burke is fascinating because he identifies that whole thing. What is it when he says about women, and don't give them about women and the price of coffee, that the price had to be slightly
higher.
Yes, exactly. So that suddenly you were investing in an idea rather than a cup of coffee, and
you were also asserting your place in the social spectrum.
Yeah,
the social ladder. If
right.
if you were hanging out paying $4 for your latte, you were going to get a nicer atmosphere and better looking people. And this is something I noticed in New York. It used to drive me insane because I never had any money. That the more expensive a place was, the more good looking women were in it. And I didn't understand. I mean, I didn't understand. What do you mean I didn't understand? I couldn't accept, I should say, this absolutely lockstep program between where the good looking people are and where you can't afford to be, you know? Um,
Yeah.
but Burke, who is the guy who befriends George and starts this company, understands
Super
it perfectly.
character.
What?
Super interesting character. Not, I mean, not the least for his being from, is it from the Bahamas? He's not.
The guy who marries Anna is from Jamaica. Burke. Did I ever say where Burke is from?
Where's Burke from?
I don't know that I could tell you. He was born Bernstein.
I get, well, but just like, so I'm looking at 267 for attracting the women. Cheap does not help. He
Right.
doesn't seem like he's an American. He seems like one of those people who is sort of like perched with a sort of a razor gimlet eye on, you know, American culture and thinks, oh, I get it. And he does.
Yeah, I think there's something a little vulture-y.
Absolutely. His whole mercantile theory is obviously on the money. And yeah, I think he's a great character.
And he's not altogether evil. I mean, there are companies out in the world that are really, really evil, and then there are companies that are, make an effort to be only slightly evil, and that's his company.
Right.
So
What he is pursuing Buddhism at the end, trying to.
right, he wants to be the richest man in the country and a Buddhist at the same time, which is
That's the American dream, actually, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's like wealth, but now without responsibility.
I never had a hard time with him. I knew exactly what he was going to say and what he was going to do. It was odd. He was totally himself.
He feels that way as a character, super, just completely self-assured, as if he had this sort of trajectory. He was born in your head and just achieved it. No, I think he's really interesting, and I think the whole topic of Starbucks and capitalism and how that connects to the Twin Towers is really interesting.
You've reminded me that at a certain point, I guess right after he graduates from college, George's son sends him a letter basically blaming him and his entire generation for how fucked up the entire world is. And George says, yeah, basically, right. I went with the flow. Reagan got it, and he cites Reagan. He says Reagan got elected, and I saw there was no bucking this. There was no getting out of it. And so, I didn't do anything to help. And it's a kind of sad moment.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that are so interesting. I mean, somehow something about the book teaches you that sex plus commerce doesn't equal prostitution, it equals marketing. It's like, and
I wouldn't, I'm not going to go into what prostitution is versus capitalism. But it's selling. Everything is selling. It's a nation of salesmen, as my friend Rick MacArthur would say.
Yes.
And he is from 2 generations before of salesmen. So in the end, the thing is, we've run out of space, and we've run out of water, and we've run out of air, and we're still selling away, and nobody is trying to slow it down. And I think George realizes this and wants to just step back from it. In the end.
What is the image? A goat in a silo eating itself to death.
Right. You
Yeah.
put it right in a grain silo, and it will eat itself to death. Exactly. And what's more American than a grain silo?
And is that the crazy sorrow?
Oh,
What is
I
the
think
crazy sorrow? I mean, I could take
I,
my
the,
at it, but
the line is from Dylan's Mr. Tambourine Man, and I was listening to it one day, and I went, "Oh, there you go. That's the title." And I think that for me, there's a lot of sorrow in life, and there was certainly a lot of sorrow in New York.
yeah.
So I think that's what I mean, you know, it spoke the name of the book better to me than anything else I came up with over the 10 years I was working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I attached it to the sort of transaction toward the end between George and his son saying, you know, you guys fucked everything up in the ways that you just described, and that sense of George of, yeah, you know, and it's it's a terrible time to be a parent and
Well,
to give the world to
right.
to understand the world that your children are inheriting. And I'm wondering if that is the sort of crazy sorrow aspect too.
Yes, that is part of it. I mean, I keep thinking about my children. My generation was full of ideals. We wanted to believe in love and peace and harmony and Earth Day and all of that. And we end up being, you know, the sort of the monstrously greedy, endlessly consuming, you know, gorgons that have, you know, essentially wrecked the place and are now handing it down to our children to fix. And how that happened is a curiosity for me still to this day. I didn't answer the question writing this book. I mean, I'll never answer the question. I don't know how it happened, you know, but I think that moment for her in the hallway where she recognizes the power of corruption, as it were, and the corruption of power when she sees how ugly the landscape can get, is one of those moments. It's a dramatization of something that happened to the world, to our world, to a
Yes.
Eastern liberal establishment world, I suppose. And you know, pretty soon everything was toxic and everything was poisonous. Are we all here? Yes. Okay. You froze for a minute.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry.
That's
Well, I
okay.
didn't mean to.
It's not your fault.
But I think, is it time for us to turn to
I
the
believe
Q&A?
it's time for us to turn to Q&A. From what I understand, it's time for us. I
Okay,
mean,
so
from what I understood from our instructions previously. Have you looked at these Q's and A's? I'm afraid of them. You can pick them out. And
I'm just gonna, well, does your Burke have anything to do with Edmund Burke?
well, interesting you should ask. George says when he hears that Burke came to New York in the early 70s, and he was named Bernstein, and he was he had dark curly hair, and everyone wants to know if he was related to Leonard Bernstein. So he changed his name because he was tired of that. And he says to George, you want to know big? That guy was big. And George says, Muhammad Ali was bigger. And Burke says, well, nobody confused me with him. But then George asks, so did you name yourself after the father of modern conservatism, Edmund Burke, or did you name yourself after Mike Burke, who was the general manager, sort of owner of the New York Yankees? Kind of had sideburns and was kind of ridiculous. And Burke says, no, I didn't name myself. I named myself after a Gene Barry character on TV, and the TV show was called Burke's Law, and he rode around in the back of a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, and one day I'm going to own that car, which he then does. And there's research. I did research on that. What car did Gene Barry ride in Burke's Law? 62 Silver Cloud. But that only took a minute. I didn't get bored. So no, he was accused of being named after Edmund Burke, but in fact, he was named after a Gene Barry TV character.
Okay. Question answered. Sherry Howard would like to know, he says, I'd like to discuss what the symbolic meaning of the World Trade Center was in the book, in the life of the characters, but also in the life of us, New Yorkers on whom those towers were, it seemed to me, just dropped down from the heavens.
Well, Jerry, baby, that's a big question. They stood there, they reflected the light, they changed with the light, they changed with the weather. They were like a living expression of this entire sort of astonishing palisade of buildings, of business buildings, of corporate buildings, of skyscrapers, and they were like vivid and alive to me. And I lived on Staten Island for a while, so I would see them, every day crossing the harbor on the ferry, and in different times of day and different times of year and different kinds of weather. And all of those permutations made them feel like spirits. They were like spirits in some kind of culture that believes in living, visible spirits. They were our spirits. And nobody in the book articulates that. It's not like anybody's walking around thinking that. But
well, it's interesting because in the very beginning of the book, I think we're at the Bicentennial celebration. It's nighttime, and then there's this really gorgeous scene in which there's the lights of the fireworks reflected on the building. So we encounter them first as a reflective surface, something to project upon, and then they come back throughout the book as surfaces on which we and other people project many things. So I mean, I thought they were really beautifully used in that way.
Yeah. And then they fell down.
They did. I missed one question. I don't want to, from Richard Hart. Where did you imagine things were going when you were in New York during the 70s?
I remember when the building next to the one that my first wife and I were living in the early 1980s went condo, and people were paying $110,000 for a one-bedroom apartment near the corner of 110th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, where the liquor store had a lucite barrier between you and everything else that was, it had to be 4 inches thick. And you put money in and the door shut, and then the door opened and swept around, and then you got your booze, and it was a bad neighborhood. By the time you got to Amsterdam, it was a tough neighborhood. And I thought, they think people are going to pay $110,000 for a one-bedroom apartment on this fucking block? Are they out of their fucking minds? And so where I was predicting things were going, they weren't going. I just thought I could live as a sort of permanent graduate student with, couches found on the street for the rest of my life. That's how naive I was.
I'm finding I'm thinking now, I'm doing sort of like the historical retrospective, trying to think of a New York novel that doesn't have to do with real estate. And the whole the whole aspect of New York, the
I'd have to check Miss
upward-
Lonely Hearts. Miss Lonely Hearts might be one, but
Daniel West, but that's
yeah.
LA, isn't it? Isn't that
No, that's New York, and then the other one is LA. The one that got made into the film with Donald Sutherland and Karen Black.
Locust?
Yeah, Dave the Locust. That's Hollywood.
Lonely Hearts is New York. Oh,
Oh yeah.
well, maybe it's not super involved with real estate since I relocated into Los Angeles.
Well, yeah, but it's a very unusual book. It's not like any other. I mean, it's just not. You can't even categorize it.
No, but I'm thinking of Edith Wharton. I'm thinking of, back up, and through the New York
Oh,
novels
yeah.
have a lot
Absolutely.
to do with the physical.
Absolutely. I'm trying to think of Washington Square, the description of how, like a fortress, the characters, the doctor's house is.
Right.
Uh,
LB, Last Exit to Brooklyn. We're going to break out of the Manhattan borough, but just New York novels are really
well, real estate,
grounded. Yes.
What is Jerry Howard saying something about Paul Auster's In the Country of Last Things? Is that not about real estate? Is that what you're saying? I don't know. There are probably some, but the fact is you live here and you start to get into real estate. But it was surprising to me, and the section I just read ends with it's a new decade, and you start the next part of the book is part 2,
Right.
and among other innovations the new decade introduced was the practice of New York City landlords driving people out of their apartments with dogs. It was the rents starting to climb. Koch was mayor. There were tax abatements for creating luxury apartments out of rundown SROs, and now everybody loved real estate. People a year or two out of college actually talked about real estate as if it were world history or Chinese art. And that was me talking there. In other words, I was shocked. I remain shocked. 40 years later, I'm still shocked. Like, what the hell happened? Yeah, people caught that disease quick, and I guess you can catch it quick in New York.
Well,
Me, I've never owned a square foot of real estate. So, but maybe someday soon. It's in the offing.
Yeah, I feel it's the real estate. I feel like there's some large, some large topic that we didn't cover, and that's marriage. But that's perhaps
the marriages in this book do not work out, alas.
No, but it is a huge subject.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think either of them would have wanted a good, lasting, strong. Would theoretically have wanted it. We're not, in fact, capable of having it.
Any of them? None of us?
No, in the book, I said the two, George and Anna, both would have wanted it, and neither was capable of having it.
Right. Although, what?
Marriage is hard, man.
I'm going to read back
My
at
first book was about marriage. What?
I'll just read back at you. 313, Tolerance unto Blindness. He said, who can distinguish all the reasons behind marital longevity, self-punishment, a kind of cruel stasis, a fight to the death, the comfort of being known and not alone?
Yeah, being known and not alone is turns out to be pretty important.
Huge. And this novel is one it's a lot about being mortal. And I think about Don DeLillo's White Noise and the leitmotif that runs through it over and over about marriage, which is which of us will die first, and if that isn't the
oh yes, I forgot about that. What's his name, Noah Baumbach, is making a film of The White Noise, which I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And what's the wife, the actress whose name has just flown out of my head, is going to play Babette, the wife. in White Noise.
Well, I have read the book, so
Mhm.
wow.
Yeah. So and the only other DeLillo, I mean, DeLillo writes like films on paper, is basically, and the only other one that's been made into a film was Cronenberg made Cosmopolis into his fabulous dystopic little movie that hardly anybody saw, but it was really good.
So I'm reading aloud from Jerry Howard. Would you accept a comparison of Crazy Sorrow to Flaubert's A Sentimental Education?
Jerry, I have tried 4 times to read A Sentimental Education, and what I think the problem is are the translations, because I tried many times to read Madame Bovary, and then finally I came upon a translation by Paul de Man, who is, you know, a Nazi criminal, and so his translation has disappeared. But it was like so much better than anything I'd ever. Flaubert wrote like a modern, and then he's being translated like a 19th century author, and I find it very difficult to. I find he did a book called 3 Stories that I've read, and I've read Madame Bovary, and I've read a ton of the letters, which are fabulous, but I've never read A Sentimental Education, so I don't know. But I do know that A Sentimental Education was sort of 1848 and revolution and massive social and political change, and I don't feel like we have any of that now. I think we were at a moment in 1976 when we might have had that, and we didn't. So I think that's a difference. But I'll accept any comparisons coming from Gerald Howard. So
And to
so
Flaubert.
yes, ultimately, what? And to Flaubert, right. Do I accept it? What, am I crazy?
We've got Flaubert, we've got Hemingway, we've got all kinds of comparisons. Good for you, Vince. Well, thank you both so much for this conversation. It sounds like folks are still trying to engage in the chat. That's really exciting to see.
Yes.
Thank you so much for the fantastic reading. Thank you, Kathryn, for joining us in this discussion. And thank you all for joining us. So don't forget to buy your copy of Crazy Sorrow in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Any parting words, friends?
Greenlight Bookstore. Go there, call them, order from them digitally, whatever you need to do. Go there now. That's what I have to say. They're a great place. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
And Kathryn, thank you, man. That was like, yeah, they don't pay you, so I don't understand why you did it, but you know,
must be love.
There you go.
Thanks so much, everyone, and have a good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.